This is the ZMAR Podcast. Elite Benefits of America helps small and mid-sized companies with their health insurance programs. And now, your host, Butch ZMAR.
See it for what it's worth, or what it is, but not what you think it should be. Jack Welch from GE Company, General Electric, he wrote plenty of books, but he would always ask, what's the reality of this, right? It's not your perception. It's not even your own reality. Like, what's the true reality of the big picture? Not the way you perceive it, not the way you want it to be. It's got, sometimes in tough situations, you try to pull it towards where you want it to be instead of what the reality is, and you miss your mark. And sometimes intuition could work in your favor. We'll talk through that too, but it's the reality of the actual situation. Because even perception could be a blessing and a curse at the same time, right? Your perception is different than everybody else's, and again, that can go your favor or not. But like in business, your perception, your intuition brings products to market. Maybe you strive longer than most people will ever dream to do, and obviously, we get the benefit of a lot of products and services in the marketplace that people had an idea and they strive for it, right? So obviously Walt Disney is one where, they wanted this huge magical playground, and nobody believed it at the time, and here people travel to Disney all the time. And then you have, other things such as, the iPhone obviously made a huge progress, the iPad, and that's just technology products to, and then obviously Tesla with their battery-operated cars, those kind of things, right? Sometimes the perception actually drives to more innovation and product demand. But at the same token, perception or intuition also saves lives, right? Especially in war. And there's a ton of stories out there, especially with World War II, of how much that comes out to play. But it also drives everything, right? It keeps us motivated, keeps us driving to bigger and better things. But the wrong one could drive us to negative results. And if we took war as an example, and we looked at World War II, Pearl Harbor bombing was one of the biggest intelligent failures of U.S. naval history. And it's obviously huge. There's probably other ones. That one's just a big one that most people still not necessarily celebrate, but more in every year on how much of a tragedy that was. But in reality, I don't know the details of what really came out of that, but they either reacted on something that was wrong or didn't react on something that was correct. And it's just the same way in business. But they turned it around and they acted on information, and that's where the Battle of Midway was the turning point of World War II, at least for the United States. And obviously they acted on intuition and perception to create an outcome, to better, in this case, the world. If we use another example, if we go back in time to 480 BC, there was the Persian invasion, and obviously at some point, and there's documents on this, and there's a couple movies that are quite entertaining of that. The Spartans decided that they were going to do something different, right? And so they had their perception, their intuition that they wanted to change the outcome of this invasion. And so 300 Spartans decided that they were going to meet them at a cross path and at a specific moment where that three sides their enemy couldn't get around. And so they had to actually go one direction. That's it. And so they figured if they had surroundings that they could fight going forward, and that way they didn't have to worry about being blindsided. Unfortunately, all 300 did perish, but I don't know. I've seen numbers across the entire spectrum, but it was at least 6,000 people that they took out during this war, which changed the outcome in the direction of the Persian invasion. And so obviously they acted on intuition. They moved the needle and moved it into a different direction. Just to keep going with some examples, you got the Apollo 13. Some people know that story, some people don't. The spacecraft had an explosion on the side of the spacecraft. They lost power, oxygen, and fuel. And so their complete mission has just been aborted. It's one of NASA's biggest tragedies they ever had in space. At that moment, in order to get them home safely, they had a square peg, round hole that they had to figure out how to keep them alive, get them back home. And there was all these things that came up. And one of the things that I find very fascinating, because I worked in electronics, worked on fighter jets, but there's a part in there where they were trying to use batteries from one part of the spaceship to the other. And when they did that, they had to reverse some things, but the amps kept getting too high. And so they had to figure out a different way, a different sequence to keep those amps low. Otherwise, they would never be able to do a reentry. And so it took people with not knowing how to do it, and intuition and knowledge, and trying to make things better. And these stories are everywhere, right? And most of the time, we usually remember or hear about the ones that end up turning out good, or they were inspirational, like some of the stories that I have shared. But there's a bunch of bad ones, and some people don't want to admit to it or even talk about it. And in my experience, a lot of people just don't want to share what happened, or they justify what happened, or they give a different alternate reality to things. And obviously, in a lot of the cases, we're not there to judge on anything, but in some cases, when you know enough information, or you could see it, especially if you live through a lot of it yourself, you could see things differently. They leave out what the reality of what was actually happening at that time. And some of us will never even know the truth, right? These stories get twisted for the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we have all met, and myself included, where we met failing businesses. And sometimes when they finally open up to you and kind of share about whatever it might be, you could see some of these problems develop over a period of time, right? And part of it is because you get to see the big picture as they're sharing it with you. A lot of times when you're stuck in a situation, you get tunnel vision, right? You miss the problems because you're so focused in a certain area. Obviously, certain times that can be a good thing, and other times it may not be, right? And so sometimes that tunnel vision just works. One example, since I brought up Apollo 13, there was other problems that came up, and they would not tell the astronauts about it, partly because they couldn't figure out a way to actually solve the problem. But the flip side, when you get to the other side of that, is that had they known about it, there would have been something else to worry about, and then they gravitate their worries, whatever they're thinking about, right? And so if they didn't know it at all, their tunnel vision works and keeps them moving. But in a lot of times, especially in business, the tunnel vision creates bad outcomes because of bad decisions. And the same thing happens with smaller businesses or even salespeople out there. If you've been selling for a while and you start talking to other salespeople, sometimes you could just start smelling the excuses that come off of them for a lack of sales or missed opportunities. And usually it comes to lack of effort in a lot of cases, especially with salespeople. But even some small businesses, when you talk to them, sometimes you have to look at them and, there's in the sales world, sometimes there's a joke where, some people say that the seventh day during the week is for rest. So you go to church and whatnot, but it's only for those who work 6 days a week, right? And so when it comes to entrepreneurship or sales, right, did you put forth enough effort during the days that you were working to take that time off, right? And then I'm not saying that you have to work on the day off, but I tell you, it's about productivity. It doesn't matter the amount of time. And so you need to put together a plan to get the results that you need. And if you're not producing the same results, then things need to be changed, or you're not producing the results that you want, or where it should be, the reality of things, then that's where things need to change. But a lot of times when you get in certain situations where you're trying to make bigger decisions and you get stuck in a certain way and you keep doing the same way over and over again, or you think you're going to have a better outcome, and it's almost like that. When the people are telling you the stories, it's almost like they're putting their own dagger in their heart, and they're dying in some ways because they're not looking at the big picture, the reality, changing their perception to figure out what's a better way to do something or approach something. Instead, they're just going to die on the sword. And lots of businesses do this, and that's unfortunate because there's a lot of great thriving businesses that eventually hit a wall, and then they're trying to figure out what the the next steps are, and then they get so stuck in their own way that they can't figure it out, or they think they're figuring it out, and it just prolongs the failure. Like even in our own industry, so health insurance specifically, so for insurance agents that sell health insurance, the Affordable Care Act changed our world drastically from a revenue or income perspective. For most small employers that are under 100 employees, some of the agents they held on for dear life, just sinking with the ship, because basically the revenue got slashed. They felt like that. In fact, they were actually Congress was trying to write us out of it, so it was going to be illegal to purchase through an insurance agent. You had to basically go to the United States Post Office to get your health insurance. Obviously, that changed a little bit, but as a result, the indirect consequences, how we got paid. And so, again, there was people that just died with the sinking ship, found reasons to either get out of the business or retire. But then there was others that actually shifted gears and figured out other opportunities. I was a little bit of a mix of both. So there was stagnant because most of the mentors I had in the business had left for various reasons, and obviously excuses not to address the big question in the room. But a lot of those who shifted gears, they shifted gears because they needed to survive. And so fast forward 10 years into the Affordable Care Act, and a lot of these insurance agents and small agencies, that's all they're doing right now is surviving. So when it comes to health benefits inside of a employer, group sponsored benefits plan, we most likely, most businesses, most executives, HR people, they avoid the big gorilla in the room, which is the cost of the health insurance. They address it, they bring it up, they put it on the big whiteboard. Hey, we got to do something about this. It's all fluff. It's all noise. It's all, hey, I want to keep my job, so I'm going to talk about this, and then look, and try to do this, what I would say, half-hearted effort to actually do something, even though they feel like they're doing it. It's the same thing like in sports, right? They feel like they're putting 100% out there, but when you put the film up and the eye in the sky doesn't lie, and all of a sudden you realize that they're not putting the effort, right? They're not getting the results because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. It's the same thing when it comes to, we could see this in a room, and there's times where I had to walk in a room, we have the initial conversation, and I already know it's not going to end well, and they're going to keep doing the same thing they're doing because they feel like that's the best thing that they could do for the money, and all they're doing is hemorrhaging cash over the whole thing, right? And so, and there's a guy in our industry coined this for a lot of us, and he's a consultant. He said, "Do you believe what I believe?" And sometimes when you have those meetings, sometimes it's hard to get them to believe what you believe, and maybe they're not ready yet. And there's a number of reasons for this, but they're afraid to address the big gorilla in the room in some way because of their own perceptions, not the overall reality. And that's my whole message here is that they just get stuck in their own world, in their own intuition, and they just won't give up on, we got to do it this way. And the reality is that they're not looking at the big picture of what needs to happen next and how to change the outcome. Otherwise, this healthcare, I hear it all the time. They're like, in the last 5 years, my premiums have doubled. Yes, because you keep doing the same thing. Guess what? In the next 5 years, it's probably going to be less now. It's going to be doubled again. They will literally just die on their sword. I mean, literally, they're just doing it to themselves. And in some cases, it's harder to do it. So a lot of these strategies that I talk about in this podcast, and I talk with the clients and other businesses, is that at some point on the smaller end of the scale, when you're a smaller company, it's just hard to pull these leverages. But there is a tipping point that comes involved where they're finally at that point where they can make some of these decisions, and they choose not to. They'd rather, again, keep sitting on the sword and rather have that result than better outcomes. Part of this is actually the broker they work with. Brokers they die hard. They really do. We're an older industry. We're stubborn for many reasons, right? And if you look at the big picture of insurance agents across the country, health insurance is a very small niche of that. There's probably, I have never looked at numbers, but if I had to guess from the world of Walt Disney, there's probably more life insurance agents out there than there are health insurance. It's just a very niched product. Some people, insurance agents, feel like they can do it and they do it to add on sales, or they try to protect their commercial business. And that's all fine, right? It's like this big, huge ecosystem that has to work, and that's just part of it. But they get comfortable in their own ways because even on the larger groups where they're still getting paid similar to what they were paid prior to the Affordable Care Act, but a lot of them are tied to specifically the premium. And I'm not saying that you can't compensate their time tying it to premium. A lot of brokers have moved away from that because it can be actually viewed as unethical in a lot of ways. And so they've gone to a per head or fee for service type model, and it has nothing to do with the premiums. But if your premiums, if you're a 1,000 employee company, and your premiums went up by 4%, well, your broker just got a 4% increase, right? So they get comfortable, right? So even on the smaller groups, I mean, some of the agents will jack up the commissions if they have an opportunity, which gouges the premium for just so they can get paid, which is a whole nother ethical situation. But they get comfortable in this situation, and they don't want to do anything. They don't want to put forth the work so you could save 20% off your premiums. And in some cases, we end up making less in the long run. And they just get comfortable. And then most companies, they have a lot of loyalty. Plus, they don't spend time to do it on their own. So they just kind of leave it in the hands of the broker, and they have a good relationship with them. And for many reasons, because we have great relationships too. And we even ones that we don't golf with or wine and dine. I mean, we just have great relationships with them. So they just don't go anywhere. They take our word for it. They think we're going to be doing the right thing. And it's getting to the point where some of these companies will probably need second opinions all the time just to make sure their broker's in check. You could still keep the same guy. And but I can't tell you how many employers, even when you finally get to that point where your current agent is offering something that's different outside the box. You got the square peg, round hole, cut costs, but keep coverage consistent, or increase their benefits, right? Make it better for the lower cost. And again, even when that's presented in front of the employer still tries to put the sword in their heart because they want to keep things the same way, right? They would rather hold on to that purple logo for dear life, just so that nothing changes. In fact, there are many people on board of directors, we've seen this, board of directors, partners, owners, HR, they will sit there and justify why they should stay, and mostly it's tied to their job. And so they're afraid if they come in with a different product, different service, different insurance agent in some cases, that they're going to lose their job, especially when it doesn't go the way it's supposed to. And not even supposed to. Usually it's a perception. It's not the reality. A lot of times when I hear stories where, yeah, we did that in the past and it didn't work the way it was supposed to, most of the time it's because their perception wasn't the true reality of what was going to occur. And the breakdown of what I really mean by that, there's a lot of people that will move to an HMO because it costs less, but then they force it to try to work like a PPO. You can't get that to work. It's an HMO. It's not a PPO. And so when you force an HMO to try to operate like a PPO, it backfires. And then all of a sudden you come up with this whole perception that HMOs don't work and they're terrible and they're there to ruin your health. And that's not true at all. Again, square peg, round hole. You have to learn how things work. And so the same things with when you come in with alternate programs that will always remove the big logos off the card because they can't profit as much because there's more transparency. Now, these companies still profit and they do well in the marketplace, but you'll know exactly how much they're taking off the top. With these big logo companies, they hide all the fees. Even though there's laws in place now, partly by the Trump administration, I think some by the Biden administration, where they have to disclose more of this. You know, for most companies under 100 employees, we never see this, right? Like we haven't seen it yet. And it's a law that they're required to do that. So I don't know when that'll occur, but there's less transparency. You don't know what the profit margin is. You have no idea what they're making in administrative fees. Even if they just throw on administrative fee, you still don't know the true picture until you get out of those products. They hide everything. That's why there's laws that changed it, but still, nobody's reading the reports either. We've had CFOs, bigger companies, and they never read the claims report. And it's like, well, do you go 1 month or even a week in some cases and don't look at your profit and loss statement? And their answer is like, no, we look at it all the time. So why wouldn't you look at a claims report the same way as a profit and loss? You see what the premiums are coming in, what's going out, where it's going, how it's being paid out, and you don't want to analyze that? The CFO or the owner needs to fire somebody. And the reality is that the loyalty only operates in one way, right? And it's not you. It's your loyalty to the insurance company is not to you, and the cost will continue to keep going up, and therefore a lot of people would rather just take the sword than try to figure out a different way to do something. So even though the pain is there, and the pain is known, some people just won't change. It's kind of like when you hear that phrase where the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know, right? And so it literally will kill a business. It definitely will. And the cost will continue to keep going up, and businesses will just sit there and justify why they need to spend the money and stay with it. But, it's kind of like health insurance or bust, right? And so these businesses need to start making these decisions, right? Like we have case studies that we could show, and here I'm going to give you a couple examples where we could save a company that's under 100 employees or thereabouts, $200,000 a year. It's an alternative way to doing things. It will not jeopardize coverage. Employees will get access to care. In fact, it might actually be better than what they currently have. And I've actually had meetings where board of directors would be arguing to justify the $200,000 difference and why we need to pay for it. To me, it's mind-boggling where they're clearly not profiting on a huge margin, right? They're probably operating like most mid-sized companies, but the reality that in the setting is they're justifying why they should spend $200,000 more per year. And if you got it, spend it, right? But wouldn't you want to spend it in areas that are more purposeful, whether it's back to your employee base, maybe expansion, whatever it might be? You should have the choice, not go to an insurance company so they can decide what they're going to do with it. And in these two case studies I'm going to share with you, they're approximately same size company, same size savings, right? Just pure coincidence. Every company's a little bit different, but there's definitely, in this case, they were very similar. I'm just going to use round numbers for my simple example, and I'm going to stick with the $200,000 in savings. And so the first one I'll talk about is the one similar to the one where they were arguing about keeping the branded logo, and we're going to just spend the $200,000 more per year, right? And that's just for the first year. Let's just fast forward 5 years. So you keep the same plan, and you're going to get those increases on the higher dollar amount, right? And so you're going to spend about, and I'm just doing round numbers for simple math. The numbers could go either way, but another $200,000 increases over those 5 year periods on top of justifying the $200,000 increase, right? So we're talking about big bucks, right? And so it's not just about the first year, because we've actually, it wasn't one of my clients, is another broker friend, where a company actually told them when he came back with some savings, I don't know, it was in the six figures. It wasn't big enough for them to get excited about. So they said, we're not moving, right? I don't know. Unless you're, a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar company, I don't understand why six figures on savings wouldn't be justifiable. But obviously, they convinced themselves of that, right? So, but company number two, right? We've had some disagreements in there, but the majority shareholder of the company said, you know what, we're going to make this decision because he wanted to save the $200,000 to reallocate it to something else that had better purpose, better rate of return on the money. And so after much back and forth, they went with this $200,000 savings, and that was just year one, right? And so, sure, was there hurdles to changing? Yes, there always is, right? First, you have some backlash where employees are like, I presented the card at the doctor's office, and the lady on the other counter didn't know what it was. So we have to get through some of that, just tell them to bill the insurance company, and every claim gets paid according to the policy. And then in other cases where we've had complaints where people will go to the pharmacy and they can't get their drug, well, they have to file an appeal or some paperwork with the insurance company so they can have on file while you're taking certain drugs. And so once it's on file, you don't have to do it. So if you were with the carrier for a long time, you might have done it years ago and you forgot about it at this point. So you have to refile paperwork. Once you get past all that, everything works out the same and you're saving money. In fact, in some cases, when we put these programs together, the employees were saving even more money out of pocket. They actually had less exposure. They had better coverage, possibly even eliminating the network requirement, going anywhere in the country they choose. It doesn't matter where they want to go. They can just go for it. Where like in a populated area like Chicago, you could pick and choose whatever hospital system you want to be part of and not have any restrictions. So if you were to fast forward 5 years, right, over that same period, right, and so not only did they save the initial $200,000, but all those other increases along the way, they're still going to get increases in their premiums, but they're probably at least another $200,000 in savings over that same period compared to what they would have paid if they just stayed the same. So we're talking about, over that period, it's probably more, but it's probably over $500,000 in overall savings in the same 5-year period versus going. So you reverse the trend. You're still going to get increases because there's still claims and losses going on, but I still think the number is much higher than that. I don't have them in front of me. I just know that it definitely increased the 6-figure amount of savings over a 5-year period. So the big question is for you that are listening to this, where do you want to be in 5 years? Do you want to be the one that's paying a little bit more because you're too loyal to the company that you're with? Or do you want to go ahead and make the changes, move the company in the right direction, and start saving and reversing that trend? In some cases, if you have good years, that number could go backwards, and it's happened. It's a reality. It's a small percentage, but it's still definitely a reality that occurs, but only if you're doing the right stuff in the middle, right? Controlling the expenses for sure. Or would you rather just pay the extra money, take the sword, stab it in your heart, and eventually the company is going to die in some capacity, right? We have a ton of these case studies throughout the years, and they do work for smaller companies. Smaller companies have a little bit more challenges because there's not enough premium in the base, but there are strategies they could put in place and start working on. Larger companies, bigger numbers, right? And so we've seen large companies still doing it the old school way because they don't want to make any changes, or they'll use the same brand carrier for administrative services, but there's still hidden fees and there's still problems that come with it. And so they definitely need to look over all the information, figure out what the reality is of things, and start heading in the right direction, right? So we have to be smarter about the way we approach it, and definitely reverse the trend of where you guys are headed with your benefits program.